Hi guys, happy Friday. It's
Woo-hoo!
us again. It's Caitlin and Alexis from Right Law Group. We're doing our Friday live video that we've been doing for a little bit now, just sharing information about our firm and our cases. We do criminal and traffic cases here in Colorado Springs and the surrounding area. And we like this to be interactive. If you have questions while we're on here talking, leave them in the comments. Otherwise, you can always come back and watch and leave comments, questions that we'll answer later or in the next video. So today we're focusing our live on probation and therapies pertaining to criminal and traffic cases. So we're gonna jump right in and just kind of start at this. So the first thing we're gonna focus on is probation. So I don't know if you can explain just kind of a general what probation is. Like,
Yes.
What does that actually mean in these cases?
Sure. There's a whole bunch to unpack here.
Yeah.
So basically, the theory behind probation is when you're looking at any kind of crime, let's take a misdemeanor because that's kind of middle of the road. If you have a misdemeanor charge, it's a class 1 misdemeanor, it carries with it a potential of up to 18 months in jail. Probation was designed to give people the chance to engage in activities outside of jail, so treatment, therapy, basically a probationary period to see if they really can come back, pay their debt to society without having to be actually put into jail. So it's a sentencing alternative, but it is something that's available in any case that has the potential of having jail time in Colorado, and any case that has the potential of having prison time. Now, on other cases like petty offenses or traffic cases that don't have the potential of jail time, probation isn't really an option. But for most cases, probation is an option where you can say, okay, instead of going to jail, we see that you have this crime, let's say a DUI or domestic violence. We're going to give you the chance to stay out of jail, do what you need to do, pay your debt back to society, maybe learn a little bit along the way. And then if you do what we ask you to, then you won't have to go to jail. And it's a really great alternative to have a jail sentence imposed or a prison sentence imposed. So there are multiple types of probation too. So people often hear of court supervised probation or unsupervised probation versus supervised probation. So court supervised probation is basically where the court is saying, okay, person who's on probation, you've got to do these things. I'm going to trust you to get it done on your own. So we're just going to court supervise you, meaning that the court is going to be checking in, seeing how you're doing, but they're not like proactively reaching out. Usually what happens on an unsupervised probation is the court sets a review date and says, okay, I'm going to look to see if this person has done all the things they're supposed to do, like traffic classes or domestic violence classes or alcohol classes. And then they say, okay, if you have completed everything that you're supposed to do, we will close this case out. If you haven't completed everything, then the court can issue a warrant for your arrest and say, well, you didn't comply with what you were supposed to do. Supervised probation is the more typical way that people think of probation. It's when you actually have a probation officer working with you. So you have to go through the probation department, you have to sign up with them, you have to connect with them and repeatedly report to them. But honestly, in some cases, having a probation officer is actually a good thing because especially for first-time offenders who are having to go through a really serious set of things like domestic violence, for example, there's a lot involved with domestic violence probation. So even though it's kind of annoying having someone breathing down your neck with a probation officer, if you look at it as this person is designed to help you get through the process, it can actually be very helpful to have a probation officer because they make sure that you're getting things done, they get you access to resources that you need, and then they are checking in on you to make sure you're doing it properly.
Awesome. So it's important to stay on top of what you've been given for probation. Otherwise, you can still go to jail.
Yep.
So I know you mentioned like domestic violence cases. So what other cases do we usually see that require or suggest probation?
So
like supervised and
right,
supervised.
There's a whole bunch of cases. Basically the idea is if you have a case where as part of a plea bargain or a plea negotiation, you're agreeing to do something, you're going to be put on probation to ensure that you've done it.
Okay.
So like, for example, in traffic cases, we see this all the time when someone gets a careless driving ticket and the district attorney or the city attorney says, well, if you do this class, I'll either give you a reduced points or I'll give you the benefit of showing me that you can stay out of trouble for this time, but that's on probation.
Yeah.
So with unsupervised probation, you'll see things where people will be told, well, you have to do a class, Sometimes on gun offenses, we'll see like a gun safety course that has to be done. For traffic cases, we'll see that they have to do like a responsible driving class. They have to complete that class, and then they have to upload it to the online filing system or get it to the court and file it with the court. Now, for our clients, even though we're technically off of the case at sentencing, as a courtesy, we upload everything for our clients just to make sure they're getting everything in and they're complying. Yeah. So that's kind of with an unsupervised case. The most typical cases that we see that have supervised probation from a misdemeanor perspective are DUIs and domestic violence. Yeah. Those cases always have probation unless they're super, super egregious, and then they might have jail time. You can also have jail before probation. So that's something that a lot of people really don't know, especially on DUIs. In Colorado, we have specific times where if you get a second, third, or fourth DUI, you have to do jail time, or fifth or sixth, obviously. But so with a second and third DUI, they're misdemeanors still, but you have mandatory minimums of either 10 days or 60 days in jail on these DUIs. So what that means is you have probation still after that, but you have to do the jail first. Yeah. Another thing that people don't understand is if it's an especially aggravated case, or if you have a history, a criminal history of some kind where the court thinks you need to have jail time, but doesn't want you to be in time for the whole period. So for example, let's say that someone has a bad habit of breaking things and has multiple criminal mischief charges. The court can say, okay, well, I see that you have this history of criminal mischief. It's not bad enough that you need to go to jail for, let's say it's a misdemeanor 1. So it's not bad enough that you need to go to jail for the full 18 months, but I do want to impose some kind of penalty, so I'm going to make you do 30 days. Okay. So the courts can do 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, depending on what kind of probation it is and what kind of case you have, as a condition of probation, meaning you have to do that jail first. Okay. But generally speaking, what we see with DUIs and domestic violence cases is we see, okay, you're given this set of things that you have to do. If you do all of these things, then you'll have your probation successfully completed. And there are a lot of steps for this to happen in probation, which I think we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so
I'm dying of thirst.
No, you're good. Gotta stay caffeinated.
Exactly, it's Friday.
Yeah, definitely. So the next question, kind of to play off of that, is like, once you're doing your probation, you're in that period, what happens when you have a violation of your probation? Which, of course, we don't like to see, but it does happen. Everyone's human. We understand, and that's why we're here. But what happens when it's violated?
So there are a number of different mechanisms in place. First and foremost, it depends on if you're on unsupervised probation versus supervised probation. So if you're on unsupervised probation, depending on the severity of the violation, if you just, let's say you're on a traffic case and you forgot to turn in your traffic class completion. Mm-hmm. So what the courts will do is they will send a notice in the mail saying, hey, you're getting revoked on probation unless you come tell us what was going on here. And they'll give you a summons and a date to come to the court and explain what was going on. If it's a more serious case and you're on supervised probation, the probation officer can also give you a summons and say, hey, you failed this UA, you gave a hot UA, so I'm going to make you come to court. And they'll give you a summons. If it's more egregious, if you just completely stop talking to your probation officer and just don't show up and they can't get a hold of you, probation actually has the authority to request a warrant for your arrest. And the courts will issue a warrant for your arrest, and you could be driving around and get picked up and not even know you had a warrant. Yeah. So it can get really rough. Now, once you have had an issue with a probation violation, you can either try to get back into compliance with probation and see if you can continue your probation. Sometimes the courts will do what we call revoke and re-grant probation, meaning they'll say, okay, this first time, bad, you didn't do it, we're going to revoke it and just restart the clock. Okay. So if you had like a domestic violence case where you had 2 years where you were sentenced to probation, if the court revokes and regrants your probation, let's say you were on probation for a year, you kind of screwed up, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, the court can say, okay, I'm revoking it, and now you have to start all over again.
Start that 2-year probation.
So then you end up with 3 years. Okay. So there are a lot of things that can happen. The other thing to be aware of, and this is the most dangerous and most scary portion of probation, is you don't have the same rights when you're on probation as you do before you're sentenced. Yeah. So for example, if the probation officer says, well, I don't think they're going to comply with probation, I think they deserve jail time, you don't get to go to trial. It's just a revocation hearing. And a revocation hearing burden of proof is much lower than trial. It's in front of a judge, and basically it's your word against probation's. And probation can say, well, they didn't do this, this, and this, so I want them to go to jail. So you have to understand that it's very, very dangerous to violate probation because you don't have as much control over it, and you don't have the same rights that you would at the beginning to fight it. You just basically have to have the judge tell you what's going on. And
it is a big deal.
Yeah, you can plead your case to them, but it's ultimately up to the judge. You don't have any bargaining, really.
Yeah.
The best thing that you can do if you do know that you've messed up on probation is get back into compliance immediately. Okay. I always tell our clients, the biggest thing, and this is just a human nature kind of thing, but the biggest thing you can do wrong on probation is not talk to your probation officer. I've had so many clients who, a lot of my people who were struggling with drug addiction or alcohol addiction, as many people know, addiction and recovery is an up and down battle. Oh, yeah. So I've had a lot of clients who are going through recovery or are recovering addicts, and they're going to have pitfalls. They're going to have issues. But for the clients that stay in contact with their probation officer, probation is designed to help you be restored and help you get back on track. Yeah. Ideally, in a perfect world. Yeah. So if you're talking to your probation officer, I had one client who kept having problems with drug uses on probation, but this client always talked to their probation officer, always let them know. They were very honest. They said, look, I'm so sorry, I screwed up. This was going on. And probation kept working with this person. And ultimately, this person avoided prison, which was a huge deal. And it was all because they kept talking with probation. So the number one tip I can give for people on supervised probation is talk to them. Even if you don't like them, talk to them. Because the surefire way to get a warrant out is they're going to say, well, this person never talked to me, so I don't know what's going on with them, and I'm going to arrest them.
Just communicate.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird because before a case is sentenced, my advice is shut up, don't say anything, never talk to anybody, never admit anything. But then after you're sentenced, be open and honest with your probation officer because it can only help. Before, keep your lips closed. After, you can blab as much as you want.
No, that's like a really good tip. We also believe that here is that we keep open communication, we're honest, that kind of thing. So it's good to know, like, you have to be yourself, be honest once you have that support, and that's why it's there. It's there to help you and stay out of jail.
And it can get really frustrating. So many people say, well, I can't believe I'm having to do this. And the issue is that I always tell people when they're saying, well, I don't want to do this, a lot of the times I'm like, look, this is keeping you out of jail. Yeah, it stinks. Yeah, you don't want to do it, but it's so much better than the alternative. So if you're taking a plea for the benefit of the deal, like if you take a plea where, let's say it's a deferred sentence meaning if you take a plea and you do probation, you can get the case dismissed at the end. A lot of people have problems. They're like, well, if I'm not going to have the case enter as a conviction, why should I do probation? What I tell them is you can look at it one of two ways. You can look at it as, hey, I've just got to put in this time to make sure I get this off my record, which is perfectly fine. But for some people, especially people who have domestic violence cases, I'll tell them, look, you can get out as much from these classes as you put into them. So if you sit there and just kind of doodle on a notepad and don't really care, you're not going to get anything out of it. It's just going to feel like a waste of your time. But if you look at this from the perspective that I think everyone in life should look at everything, there's something to be learned here. And you just say, okay, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to get something out of this. You actually can get a lot out of probation. It's not a popular thought because people think of it as punishment, but if you come into it saying, okay, something obviously was going wrong in my life because I had to end up here. You may not be responsible for the full amount of the crime that they charged you for, but something was going on. So if you can just say, okay, I'm going to try to get as much as I can out of this, you'll ultimately be very successful in probation.
Yeah, that's great. That actually brings us to the next portion of this is to talk about therapy, which is kind of the same thing. You get out of it, like what you put into it. So in many of our cases, we also see our clients going to therapy. So we talked about it, I think, a couple weeks ago, that it does a lot to help just like your character and how you come across in court and, you know, in your case. So the question here is like, is therapy mandatory? Is it required? Is this part of a sentencing? How does it kind of criminal?
Let's look at the two most common types of cases that have therapy involved. So DUIs and domestic violence cases. DUI cases, you're going to have to go, if you are convicted or take a plea for anything that is an alcohol related offense, if it's a DUI, if it's a DWAI, even if it's what we call a wet reckless, if you have any of those pleas, you have to do alcohol treatment and therapy. On the other hand, if you have a domestic violence charge and you have a plea of some kind or you have a deferred sentence, you're going to have to do domestic violence classes. Now, in both of these cases, the way that they're set up, especially in El Paso County, is before you're sentenced. So you take a plea agreement in front of the judge. You enter your plea of guilty, but then before you're sentenced on a DUI, you have to go through an evaluation. Now, in domestic violence classes, what they do is they get the plea and the sentence, and then you do the evaluation after. But in both cases, you're going to be doing an evaluation with a trained evaluator in either domestic violence or alcohol and drug use. Both of these evaluations kind of have the same pattern and feel to them. What they're going to ask for probation, and this is huge for people who are having to go in and answer. Yeah. Very, very important. Make sure you know what you're writing down on your evaluation because they're gonna ask you about it. Yeah. And you have to make sure that you're taking responsibility. Sometimes that can be really difficult for us to do, especially if we were wrong, but not that wrong. Yeah. Yeah. But you have to take responsibility because probation only wants to work with people who want to take responsibility and get back on track. Yeah. If you go in denying everything right off the bat, they're gonna be hard on you from the get-go. Yeah. So when you do this evaluation, let's talk DUI evaluations for now. So for the DUI evaluation, you're gonna go in. You're gonna have in non-COVID times, you'll have to go in and sit down and fill it out. In COVID times, they'll send it to you. Yeah. But you'll have a piece of paper, like a couple of pieces of paper. It's a document there. You go through and you fill out answers to questions. So they'll ask you questions about your life habits, your patterns of drinking, but there's a little bit of trick to it. So they'll ask you questions about how you used to be and how you have been since this incident. I always tell our clients it's incredibly important for you to realize which column you're looking at, because if it's the used to be, you can be honest, but if it's the what you've been doing since, you better be honest, and it better be I haven't been drinking. Yeah. So making sure that you're very carefully answering those, and they'll ask questions like on a scale of 1 to 5, and they'll try to flip the questions. So it's really important to make sure you're taking your time, looking at exactly what they're asking, and answer that question. And then they will schedule a second appointment with you to actually have a conversation with a probation officer, and they'll do a live interview and basically go over the questions that you answered and interview about that. Now, the biggest thing from a defense perspective that I always tell people, and this is true in any case at all ever, unless the police are questioning you, in which case don't answer any questions. But if you're at this stage in the case, only answer the question that you're asked. So a lot of people will either not answer direct questions, or they'll try to blab on about other things. Trust me, they will get to the other things. Just answer the questions that you're asked. Yeah. It can be very frustrating, and some people want to overshare, some people don't want to share at all. Yeah. But as long as you're listening very carefully to what they're asking and answering the question that's asked of you, you'll be fine. In both cases, both DUIs and domestic violence, once you've done that evaluation, the evaluator is going to write a report and say, okay, based on this report, these are the recommendations that we have for this person on probation. Okay. So in a DUI case, they'll send that report to the court and say, okay, judge, this is what we think should happen based on what we've done. And the judge has the decision whether or not to say, yes, I'm going to sentence them to these things. In a domestic violence case, unfortunately, you get that evaluation. They say, okay, you're going to do this, and that's what you have to do. So in both cases, there are different tracks and different levels that people can go through based on the severity of the case and based on their answers. In both of them, they have track A, B, C, and D, and then F for felony. So there are a variety of different levels and different placements that you can be put in, but it's all dependent on, number one, your relationship with the probation officer and how you're treating them, and number two, how you're answering those questions and how upfront and honest you're being without blabbing into everything else in your life.
Yeah, awesome. That's a really good info. Like we said, so important to keep communication with the probation officer. Yep. So with the therapy, we talked about, I think with our DV series, that this is, supports good character in the eyes of the court, especially if you're trying to get anything dealt with. Right. With that, so the therapies that we see with DUI and DV, what therapies actually do they actually go to? Do they go sit? Is it a weekly thing? Do they have to go for a year? How is that?
That's a great question.
Dealt out.
So in Colorado specifically, number one, it depends on the individual case and it depends on the answers that you give. Oh, we have Aaron and Sean with us. Hey guys. So it depends on what you're doing as far as answering the questions. But let's take just a run-of-the-mill DUI case, for example. Let's say you've been charged with DUI in the state of Colorado. Two different things are happening, and we've talked about this in previous episodes. You've got both the criminal courts and the DMV. Yep. If you were charged with a DUI, the DMV is going to require you to take level 2 alcohol classes. Now, that's going to happen no matter what. Even if you're found not guilty, the DMV is still going to require it. Yep. So that's the first part of therapy, is those alcohol classes. They're teaching you about alcohol consumption. I've had so many clients tell me, I didn't realize how quickly you can get over the legal limit. Because they do the analysis, they show you all the ways that you can become intoxicated without even knowing it. They describe what distracted driving is and divided attention. So that level 2 alcohol education is the first step in a DUI. And then after that, you'll have a certain number of therapy hours. And that's really talking with you about how you can correct drinking behaviors. If you're using alcohol to kind of numb pain, that's unhealthy for sure. So they talk about healthy behaviors that you can do, other things that you can do, and helping you be on a better path moving forward. Now, the amount of those therapy hours or the number of those therapy hours that you're going to have to do depends on, number 1, your BAC, number 2, the facts of the case, and number 3, your answers with probation. Okay. So what you were asking is, how do you kind of get a leg up and how do you look better towards the courts? You can actually take those classes early, especially if you're working with an attorney. We at our law firm have a number of different people that we refer our clients out to get started early, just to, number 1, get in there while you can, especially if you still have your license and you can still drive around. Getting that stuff done early is really important. But number 2, it really shows the DA and the judge that you are being proactive, you're taking this seriously, and you're doing as much as you can up front. With domestic violence classes, we don't really have a mechanism yet in place to take them early. There are some things coming out where we may be able to start taking domestic violence classes early, but it's really good to make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do to prepare. And then when you're in those therapy classes, depending on what level you're put in, it will be for a certain number of weeks. Okay. The minimum that we see is usually 12 weeks on everything, but that's for alcohol classes, it's 12 weeks of classes and then an additional 12 to 14 weeks of therapy. Okay. So just be prepared. I tell most people this is going to take at least a year, maybe more of your life to get through this. So you can fight against it and really hate your life for a year, or you can breathe, embrace it, and lean into it.
No, that's good. That's good to know. Like I said, for probation and therapy, there are tools to help you. You know, it's a very stressful time in your life. Anytime you need to work with us, but they're there, and like we said, you get out of them what you put into it. So that's just something that we kind of, you know, take to heart, is like, you need to work on yourself. We're in this situation, that kind of thing.
And that's really why our brand is the way it is. So other defense attorneys may have different perspectives, but Right Law Group was designed specifically to help people get on the right path, get back on track. So we're really working with clients who are saying, I either screwed up and I want to get back on track. Let me know what I need to do. We do have clients who need our help because they were wrongly charged. That happens all the time. And the right path for them is getting this all taken care of. But for those of you who have been pulled over for DUI or have a DUI case where you're like, I was drunk, I need to address this, it doesn't have to be the end. What we'll do is help you get into probation, into therapy, into classes the right way, make sure you have the right frame of mind going in. And like you said, Caitlin, I mean, you get out of what you put into it. So it can be a terrible time, or it can be a learning experience.
Character building.
Yes.
So that was just kind of all we had to cover today. I know it was a kind of general, but we just really wanted to answer those questions because we've been talking about probation and therapies in the last couple episodes that we've done. So the next few Friday lives we're going to feature our attorneys. Yay! So next week we'll have our first kind of like get to know your attorney. I think Dan's going to do it, so you guys can kind of get to know him a little bit more. And then,
give him some love.
So the next couple weeks we'll kind of do that and kind of have a feature, just because, you know, working with us, you do get close to your attorney and you get to talk to them and stuff, but you kind of get more of a personal feel for who they are and just kind of put them out there. So, I hope you guys have a good, safe weekend. Happy 4th of July. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.
But play with sparklers.
Make your choices. Awesome. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. And like I said, just leave your questions or comments or anything on these videos. So we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, guys.